The story that I'm about to share with you took place a long time ago. A decade ago, in fact. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure why I've decided to share it now after so many years in silence. I suppose it has something to do with the fact that everybody I knew who could relate to what had happened is gone now. I won't lie to you. A part of me fears that I might be next. I don't expect you to believe me, though. I suppose if anybody would believe it, it would be you guys. I decided to post it here because you accept people's experiences without judgment, and because people need to know what had happened. And with a community so large, this is bound to reach somebody. What happens is that I know the truth, and surely you will too. I suppose it would be helpful for you to know a little bit of background information. A little over 10 years ago, I was a senior in high school, and like many teenagers, I was high off of the feeling of invincibility a driver's license and a car full of friends gave to me. It seems incredible to me that we could have been so incredibly naive. We were so full of ourselves back then. It's a wonder we ever even made it to that road. When I look back at all the stupid stunts that we had pulled, well, you know what they say about hindsight. My buddies and I had a real tight-knit group. A couple of us had been together since the 4th grade. That was me and Tyler. Tyler was a big guy, tall, even when we were little, and bulky too. And although none of us were really jocks, Tyler played on the high school football team. The next to come along was Franco. He joined us in the 6th grade. Everything that Tyler was, Franco wasn't. But he had a sense of humor that rivaled the most gifted stand-up comedians. I used to tell him that he should do stand-up, and he would always make some self-deprecating joke and laugh it off. Jeremy and Corey came last, in 9th grade. Those two were as different as day and night, but somehow, their dynamic worked. One was tall and lanky, and perhaps the most responsible of us all. The other was rough, rugged, had a full beard at 14, smoked, and used to experiment with a tattoo gun of his own making. And then there was me. I don't know how I fit into the group, honestly. If pressed, I would say I was a sort of combination of the qualities of each of us, which, now that I think about it, just about sums me up. A jack of all trades, a master of none. Anyway, the 5 of us were a real tight crew, and despite the fact that we didn't all attend the same high school, it didn't stop us from doing just about everything together. I can tell you stories about adventures in chasing girls, forming bands, facial hair contests, and the wonders of a corncob pipe, but that's not really the point. If you're at all familiar with the greater Delaware Valley, or really anywhere in southeastern Pennsylvania, northern Delaware, or eastern Maryland, then you'd probably heard the tale of Devil's Road. I know, it sounds like some silly urban legend with a trumble name. And I suppose much of it is just that, a legend. Tales vary wildly from person to person, just about the exact nature of this little stretch of roadway, with everything from satanic cults, inbred DuPonts, to a rather famous and wealthy family in Delaware state history, and the KKK, alternately making appearances in various versions of the legend. A couple of things most of the different versions agree upon include travelers being chased off the road by jeeps or pickup trucks with bright headlights, oddly shaped trees, and a general air of creepiness that permeates the site. Below is a link with a short overview of the general legend and its various incarnations. If you want to poke around on Reddit or YouTube, there are some posts and videos that you can read and or watch to help round out your understanding of the legends in the area. A local radio station has also recently covered the legend, and their write-up is here as well. I think I've successfully proven that this story isn't just some fabrication I made up out of sheer boredom. Stories of Devil's Road and the Cold House have abounded for decades, long before I was even born. It's easy, of course, to write off such stories as ridiculous myths or misunderstandings, and while I will agree that some of the tales are clearly deficient, legends tend to have a nucleus of truth to them. In the case of Devil's Road, that nucleus is not to be underestimated. One thing I would like to be very clear on is the exact location of Devil's Road. From time to time, different names have been given as to the location of this bizarre place. Beaver Valley Road was once incorrectly given to me as the name of the entry road. This is again incorrect. The road's true name is Cozart Road. It's not easy to find. Cozart Road is one of those blink and you miss it type of locations. The turn is hidden away from the main road connecting Pennsylvania with Delaware, and there is no longer a street sign identifying the road at all. If you don't know the location already, chances are you won't be able to find it. However, since I've been there more than once, I do know the location. If traveling northbound on Route 52, you want to make a right-hand turn immediately after passing the Fairville Inn. Here's a satellite view of the area. As you can hopefully see, Beaver Valley is just to the southwest of our destination, so perhaps it's understandable why sometimes the names get mixed up. This entire area is a complex web of connecting winding backroads that take travelers off the beaten path and away from civilization. If you're unfamiliar with the area and don't have a good GPS, it's very easy to get lost back here. And one thing is for sure, you don't want to get lost anywhere near this area. A word of caution. I know many of you enjoy seeking out and exploring places like this. Probably the thrill gives you a rush of adrenaline, right? I do understand. That's what drew us to the road a decade ago. Do not try to drive on Cozart Road. I'm not sharing this story to goad you into going there. I'm sharing it with you for my own reasons and to warn you to stay away. Nothing good can come from ignoring my warnings. Besides, no trespassing signs are posted all over the place. You'd be gambling with the law if you got caught, and again, you don't want to get lost or caught in a place like this. As an aside, the Johnston brothers, a notorious Pennsylvania criminal outfit active in the 1970s, murdered 3 teenage boys and buried their bodies on Cozart Road. Those remains, as far as I'm aware, have never been found. The first time I traveled the road was a summer afternoon in 2008 with Franco and Tyler. We were so excited to experience an urban legend for ourselves that our eagerness outweighed our sense. After all, not much excitement usually happens in our neck of the woods. I guess I can't blame us for wanting a little bit of action. And so, we hopped in my car, my old 1998 Hyundai Elantra, and made the drive in broad daylight. That first trip was uneventful. Nothing of note happened on that first drive other than the fact that we missed our turn. Like 3 times, and that was before they removed the sign. Except for one thing. Each of us seized on immediately. The place had an eerie feel almost as soon as we began to crawl along its path. You might dismiss that as just our imagination. After all, we were kids hopped up on urban legend hype. Of course it would seem eerie to us. Let me elaborate. Route 52, the main road you turn off of to get to Cozart Road, is a busy thoroughfare. You can hear the traffic go by when you make the turn. Once you're on the road proper, though, the noise from Route 52 traffic simply ceased to exist. It was as if we had driven into a vacuum where outside contamination wasn't welcome. Like I said before, it was a summer day, and we had all windows of the car rolled down for maximum effect on the road. And we heard not one sound. Not one. I still remember Franco's nervous quip like it was yesterday. who died here? As we traveled slowly down the road, it became painfully clear that this was not a roadway made for convenience. Kozar Road is actually a two-way street, but it's physically impossible for two cars to pass each other. The road is so narrow that it's barely wide enough for a single car. If you do ever happen upon another vehicle moving in the opposite direction, one of you is going to have to back up a long way down a narrow, winding roadway. Yet another reason I do not recommend trying to find this road. Another strange thing that we had noticed were the trees. The legends had mentioned something about the oddly shaped trees, and boy were they odd. Not a single one of them looked like any tree that I had ever seen. The trunks were bent and contorted backwards away from the roadway. You know how trees usually just grow straight up? Well, imagine an endless line of trees on either side of the road contorted crookedly backwards. And even though it sounds crazy, I couldn't help but feel that even nature itself wanted nothing to do with this roadway. I mentioned the unusual silence already. That continued as well. And remember, this was midday on a bright summer afternoon, with all of the car windows rolled down. You would think we would have heard birds, squirrels, anything chirping or rustling in this heavily wooded area. But the only sound that we were granted was the sound of our tires as we pressed on through the silence. And that was all that had happened during our first trip. We each agreed that the trees looked weird and the abnormal silence was a bit unnerving. But as far as introductions go, it was a bit disappointing. We didn't see any of these so-called skull trees, and we didn't see any sign of the cult house, and nobody chased us off the road. However, we agreed that we would go back with the whole gang later, at night for maximum spook factor. After bringing Corey and Jeremy up to speed on the legend and our experience taking the road for the first time, everybody was excited to try a nighttime ride. This time, we all packed up into Jeremy's Jeep and prepared ourselves for a late-night adventure with an added twist. This time, we weren't just going to drive down Kozar Road. We were going to get out and walk. At this point, I feel I should go into a bit more detail surrounding some of the more gruesome legends about Kozar Road and the cult house. Specifically, if you have not yet looked into the links that I provided earlier. The DuPont family patriarch was Pierre Samuel de DuPont de Nemours, 1739 to 1817. He immigrated to America from France during the French Revolution. His descendants founded some of the most enduring and successful businesses in the Delaware Valley. And by the late 19th century, they were among the wealthiest families in the United States. Patriarch Pierre helped Thomas Jefferson navigate the Louisiana Purchase, and generations later, the DuPont family designed the first secret atomic plants during World War II. The Delaware Valley is littered with institutions bearing the DuPont name, with everything from chemical companies, museums, schools, and children's hospitals bearing the DuPont name and fingerprint. Rumor and scandal have followed the DuPonts from almost the very beginning, up to and including incest, sorcery, and murder. Patriarch Pierre was fond of advocating intermarriage between DuPont cousins to ensure honesty of soul and purity of blood. That much is known for sure. And according to some sources, sometimes the practice extended to siblings. Even generations later, in the early 20th century, the DuPont clan maintained the practice of family marriage, despite the rising tendency towards abnormalities in their offspring and a family weakness for tuberculosis. And this brings me back to the story surrounding Kozar Road. Local legend says that the cult house, which sits high atop a hill overlooking the abnormal roadway, once belonged to the DuPont family. The skull trees refer to locations along the road, beneath the hilltop mansion, where members of the family buried their deformed children, or as some versions of the story say, offered the living children as sacrifices. Sacrifices to what is anyone's guess. I don't know what I believe about the DuPonts and their involvement in this whole thing. At the end of the day, I can only tell you what I saw and what happened to me directly. I can also tell you that this entire area along the Brandywine River is old. Older than old. European settlement in this area dates back some 400 years, and the indigenous people of the land lived here many centuries before that. Tribes native to the area include the Lenni Lenape, whose name translates to pure original people. In colonial times, native tribes further north in modern-day New England likewise referred to the inhabitants of the Delaware Valley as the original people. All of this is information I have learned since, well, I'm getting to that. Nightfall eventually came, and with it, the boundless hype of 5 teenage boys ready for a scary adventure. None of us really expected much, especially after the first trip earlier in the day had been so anticlimactic. At best, we were hoping to maybe get chased by some rednecks in a pickup truck. It would be a cool story to tell at least. Around 10:30 p.m., we all loaded into Jeremy's Jeep and made our way to the road with the goal of reaching it by 11 p.m. We made pretty good time, and our memory served us well as far as finding the entry point. Once again, traffic noise simply cut out, once we had turned onto the road proper. No sound, not even the chirping of crickets, gave life to the humid summer air. As we reached a point about 5 minutes into our crawling drive, Jeremy stopped the Jeep so we could get out and explore. It was the deadest quiet that I have ever heard. "Hey, come check this out," Tyler said quickly. We followed him up an embankment where he was kneeling next to a hollow tree trunk. I didn't get a picture of her back then. I didn't own a smartphone in 2008. But I did a little digging, and now I'm sure there are plenty of reasons out. As you can see, the hollow part of the tree has been cemented in. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of reasons why someone might fill in a little tree hollow with cement and brick. I'm sure that on a lonely, isolated road like Cozart Road, a road that is about as convenient to navigate as the U.S. tax code, it makes total sense to fill in a random tree with cement. But for the life of me, I can't think of any. Cozart Road is a quiet, in the extreme sense, back road in rural Pennsylvania that does not get a lot of traffic volume. What purpose does the cement serve? What is it hiding? Hey guys, look up. Jeremy's voice sounded strange, almost as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. I looked to see what he was staring at and was completely taken aback. High atop the hill on the road's right stood an enormous house bathed in orange light. 2 large windows blazed like orange eyes overlooking the valley, with 2 large, unmistakably cross-like shapes occupying either window. In the quiet darkness of the valley floor, with contorted trees twisting away from the road, and a cemented-in tree trunk just inches away, it was very easy to look up at the house and feel a sense of uneasiness that might have made the whole trip worth it. From this vantage point, with all that orange light and the crosses in the windows, it looked like a genuine haunted house. What made me even more uneasy was that it hadn't been there 10 seconds earlier. And now you could argue, I suppose, that the house had been there all along, and that whoever was inside just hadn't turned on the lights yet. At 11 p.m., I had a hard time believing that, but you could argue that point. But I had already been there hours earlier in broad daylight. 3 of us had, and none of us had noticed a great big manor house with crosses in the windows, looming over top of us when the sun was out. You would think something like that would be difficult to miss, but miss it we did. Not once, but twice. Call me crazy, but I don't think that house was there until Jeremy pointed it out. It was about that time that I began to put some of the pieces together. Perhaps it wasn't a coincidence that this tree, which someone had gone to such efforts to conceal, stood at the base of the manor-topped hill. Thinking back to the stories I had read in preparation for the trip, perhaps there genuinely was something to hide. And that was when the baby cried. "Did you hear that? What the hell was that? Shut up, listen." I strained my ears to make sure that I wasn't imagining it. For the first time since we had turned onto the road, there was sound coming from somewhere other than us. The unmistakable wails of a crying baby. It was muffled, as if it was coming from somewhere, some ways off. But it was no mistake. All 5 of us heard it. I slid down the embankment closer to the Jeep to see if I could hear it better from there, but, if anything, the cries just grew fainter still. Taking their cue from me, the others climbed down off the embankment and we all piled back into the car. You might think us cowardly for not investigating the sound further. What if there was an actual baby in distress? My guess is that whatever we heard was something beyond our help. The Jeep moved at a crawl as we craned our necks to look up to the house on the hilltop. There didn't seem to be any driveways or access roads, so it was a bit of a mystery as to how anybody actually got up the hill to get into the house. We would have kept looking up for who knows how long, had it not been for the ungodly thunder that ripped through the air, making our Jeep rattle and shake like a tin box on wheels. The sound was by far the loudest, most earth-shaking rumble I had ever heard. It sounded like a freight train was roaring through the air above us. The look we all shared with one another, as we tried to figure out the source of the ungodly noise and the crying from before, was one of confusion and fear. We had come here to be freaked out and entertained. The road was paying us in fear. At someone's urging, I forgot who it was, Jeremy kicked his Jeep into gear and began to drive away a little faster than before. The rumbling had stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the night deathly still and quiet once more. We nearly crashed when Jeremy slammed his feet on the brakes as something came out from the tree line on our left and into the middle of the road. A goat stood there looking at us. It was pale white and would have stood out in the darkness, even without our headlights shining on him. It wore no collar and no bells. It didn't chew its cud like goats tend to do. It simply gazed at us, and we at it. It seemed to look right through us. I've never been frightened by a farm animal before, but I didn't like that thing one bit, and I felt like it didn't care for us either. We sat there in silence, 5 teenage boys staring down a pale goat on a deserted road that had given us more than our share of creeps for the night. And then it bleated at us. It was the worst sound that I had ever heard in my life. It bleated the sound of a crying baby. I sat there transfixed as this creature replayed the wails that we had heard earlier while investigating the sealed-up tree. It bleated continuously, each new sound louder and more aggressive in its agony than the one that came before it. Our ears rang with the plaintive whining of frightened babies so loudly that we actually covered them with our hands. Franco buried his head in his arms and shuddered in his corner in the back seat. When it was over at last, the goat gave us one last piercing stare. I could have sworn that it smiled. Without warning, it took off up the hill, in the direction of the mansion. None of us said anything for a long while. We simply sat there burning gas for a minute, Jeremy's foot never leaving the brakes. I was the first one to snap out of our collective stupor, and when I did, I was in for a surprise. "Jeremy," I asked quietly, "is your clock right?" He nodded. "Why?" "It says 3:30 in the morning." "I think you must realize that everything I've described so far did not take 4.5 hours to transpire. Yet according to his clock, it had been 4.5 hours since p.m. We each checked our phones, only to be greeted with another surprise. Each of our phones had a different time. Jeremy's phone matched the time of his Jeep. Corey's read 1:15, Tyler's 2:36, Franco's 3:19. Only mine read anything like what the real time actually was. 12:04 a.m. I've long thought about that little point, and I think I finally understand what it meant. If I'm right, perhaps it's a good thing I'm sharing my story now. Utterly unnerved and more than a little terrified, we sat in silence as Jeremy spurred the Jeep to drive a little further down Cozart Road, and hopefully towards its end. We had just rounded a little bend in the road when the rear view filled up with blinding white light. From what little I could see, our tail was being closely followed by a caravan of dark SUV-type vehicles, with their high beams switched on. I don't know where they could have come from. There is nothing on either side of the road but woods. There was nowhere for the SUVs to come from, and they certainly hadn't been behind us the whole time. But despite how little I understood it, the fact remained that they were behind us now, moving at high speed with high beams blazing. We screamed at Jeremy to move faster, and he frantically played with the clutch to get the Jeep moving as quickly as possible. The caravan was gaining on us rapidly. The Jeep was filled with sounds of frantic yelling, cussing, swearing, and the general cacophony of chaos. We had come to play on Devil's Road, but the road had turned out to play with us. Eventually, we did arrive at the end of the road, hanging a hard right onto Creek Road. The caravan stopped short after we made our turn, not bothering to follow us anymore. For reasons I've never fully understood, Jeremy stopped the Jeep as well with the caravan still in view. We each looked back behind us at the last few hundred feet of Cozart Road, illuminated under the bright lights of the high beams, and a pale goat emerged from the hill on our right. It stood bathed in the light of the caravan, and once more stared intently ahead at us. It did not blink. It did not chew. And when it opened its mouth, we heard the unmistakable screams of a woman in sheer agony, and the pained words chose. "No, no, please, no." A baby cried as we drove away, leaving Cozart Road behind us. As I said, over a decade has passed since that night spent on the road. Franco and I tried to talk of it a few times to make sense of it. We never could, and the others would never speak of it again. After high school, we each went our separate ways. It's amazing how so many years of friendship can so easily vanish. Some might say that it was always bound to apart in just a few months after graduation. If I'm honest with you, I blame the road for some part of it. Maybe that's stupid, but I can't help but feel that it stole something from us that night. Those sounds, those images that we couldn't explain. I wondered what would happen of us if we had never gone there at all. Corey died at 22 years old. Tyler followed not long afterwards. For a while, Franco, Jeremy, and I tried to rekindle whatever we had had in the wake of losing our friends. It didn't last. All the humor had gone out of Franco, and Jeremy, our pillar of responsibility, had experienced a personality downturn of bipolar proportions. He knocked up a girl, ran off, and shut himself off from the world.
Nice.
They found his car a year ago in the Brandywine River. His body still strapped into his seatbelt. And for Franco, not long before Jeremy's crash, Franco took up a job as a landscaper. He said it paid well. In fact, he had seemed happier than I had seen him in years. It was like seeing a glimpse of the old Franco. He used to make me laugh so much. They found him hanging from a contorted tree on Cozart Road last summer. Now that each of them have passed, I now believe I understand the meaning of our clocks that night on the road. Only one clock kept the right time. Only one person has lived long enough to have a reasonably happy life. Only one person has kept going long enough to tell you what had happened, and hopefully to convince you to leave well enough alone. Because nothing good can come from chasing after legends. Recently I decided to do the unthinkable. Early this past autumn, I returned to Cozart Road. The road sign had been taken down, but I would never forget this place. I wasn't foolish enough to go at dark this time. I decided to go alone in broad daylight. I would be dragging no one along with me this time. The road sign isn't the only thing that has been removed. I knew from my research and participation in online forums that Cozart Road had seen an increased police presence in recent years. They say it's because residents of the quiet and peaceful streets have complained about unruly adventure seekers disturbing the peace. I don't really believe that's really it, but that probably does play a minor role. The cement tree has been cut down, and this is what it looks like now. If the police sought to end the mystery of this place by cutting down the tree, they were sadly mistaken. The mystery endures. The mansion on the hilltop was nowhere to be seen, something I expected in the broad daylight. Whatever makes its abode here is a being of night and shadow. I'm certain of it now. I don't know what involvement, if any, the DuPonts have ever had in the mystery of Cozart Road. It's possibly they were only scapegoats this entire time for something far bigger and more ethereal than themselves. But then again, maybe those rumors have followed them all these centuries for a reason. Maybe they do have a role to play. Then again, maybe the family DuPont, who cast so long a shadow in my local history, and in American history in general, are merely pawns in something larger. Maybe it was a coincidence that the Johnston brothers killed those kids and buried them here, and not somewhere else. Maybe it's a coincidence that the last known locations of each of my friends was either on this road or very close by before their bodies were found. But I doubt that. One thing my research has taught me: this place is old. Older than the United States. Older than Pierre Samuel DuPont. Older even than the pure, original people who once roamed this land. Whatever is here, it was here before us, and it will be here after us. And that's especially true if you think you would like to play with Devil's Road. The road is not a toy to be explored for your amusement. We learn that to our sorrow. A pity that I'm the only one left who maybe understands it truly. I drive near Cozart Road every day on my way to work. I even used to take Creek Road, that roadway that connects to Cozart, and that we turned onto in our haste all those years ago to escape a convoy of SUVs and a pale goat. You better believe I was thrilled when I found a slightly faster way to work that didn't involve getting so close to Cozart. When I returned last fall, I didn't linger on that road long. I didn't even leave my car to take pictures of the tree stump. I drove along quietly, observing what I could, seeing less than I remember, and treating the road with much more respect than my 17-year-old self ever would have. This time, there was no high-beam chase. There was no screaming woman. There was no crying baby. It was almost peaceful. The only thing that stood out came near the end of the road, near the intersection with Creek. In my rearview mirror, I could have sworn I saw a pale head sticking out of the trees, and the faint sound of Franco's laughter coming from in between the horns. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video. Just a little update or an announcement. I just started a new channel. It's titled Corrupted Memory. It'll be linked in the end card of this video, so check it out and let me know what you think.